Okay, so I would like to introduce our next guest speaker. This is Jackie Grange from Voices Gloucester, and she's going to be doing a talk on hidden voices, creating community-led heritage projects. Please give her a warm welcome.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. Can you all hear me all right through the system? Thank you. So I'm going to cheat and start off by showing a very short film that gives a little bit of the flavour of what Voices is all about from some of our community partners, and then I'll go into my presentation. So, yeah, right. I'll start that for a minute.
So Voices Gloucester is a way of celebrating the stories and histories of Gloucester people.
The whole range of projects that Voices undertakes are fantastic examples of what happens when you listen to people's stories and you explore history and heritage which isn't your own history and heritage.
Gloucester has this tremendous history, and when I started talking to people in Voices, I used to say, well, there's history and then there's sort of community history, and a couple of people pulled me up short and said, well, no, community history is always part of history.
Voices Gloucester is at the heart of the communities that need to be heard. The communities that don't normally have a platform to speak or to celebrate who they are and what they do and what they contribute to Gloucester.
Voices Gloucester gives people the opportunity to tell their stories with their voices authentically.
Voices Gloucester is a voice. You know, our women, I mean, the celebration of the studio and when people looked at the sort of diagram of the dress and saw their name, it gives them ownership.
Wearing the costume of Gloucester was a massive point in my life where I sat there and thought of my inner child and my younger child that I was, because walking through the crowds and parading, seeing all these little girls, you know, looking up at me like, you know, you're representing, look at what that shows. That was so powerful.
And one of the things that strikes me about Voices Gloucester is the diversity of the different communities and cultures that the organisation that Voices Gloucester supports.
It really celebrates things that people take pride in, the things that are important to so many different people, and so joining people together, I think that is the added value that we can bring.
Okay, so that just gave a little bit of a flavour of some of the very many projects that we do. As you can see by our story and numbers, in the last 3 years we had 54 funded projects, 127 events across 35 venues, 500 students and teachers engaged through local schools, 16 mentorships, and actually there's a comma in the wrong place there. It's more like 100,000 people that came to projects that we delivered over the last 3 years. I think it's been really interesting coming to this event because it seems to have been a lot of people are here from venues where you've got one museum or one place that is working with one community. And I think the whole secret, the whole wonderful thing about Voices is it is many voices, and we are working with many communities. So I'm going to start by just going back to a little bit on how we started, because I think that foundation is really important for how we've managed to reach so many people. Gloucester is, for those of you who don't know it, is a relatively small city, a relatively not particularly well-off city, but with an incredible history and heritage and incredible diversity for that part of the world. For many years it had, in the kind of boom period of lottery, a lot of the big players, they had great place funding from Heritage Lottery and the Arts Council, and it had a number of the bigger heritage organisations like the Cathedral had some interesting lottery projects. This led to the establishment of a Heritage Forum, which has about 70 members from different heritage organisations, which gave us a foundation on which we built Voices. Voices was originally City Voices, an unpaid part of the local history festival for the things that they didn't know quite where to put. So the stories about black history, the education projects, the stories about local history. And then our kind of first massive opportunity came against all odds was during COVID. Suddenly the History Festival looked like it was going to be cancelled, all the heritage venues were closed, and we were able collectively to apply for COVID emergency fund. And for the first time, the Voices programme had some funding. So we did lots of exciting things with the Heritage Forum. We did this interactive map, which opens up to stories about volunteers and our venues. But actually, because we were already working with a community panel and listening to the community of Gloucester, people were able to say to us, well, and during COVID as well, during this time, we're looking at living history, and of course, George Floyd happened, and our community was able to say to us, you've got this map of the city centre, we're not represented. Our history happens in these local places. And that's where we really kind of started building really, really strong links with the community. So although Gloucester Looking Up, as it was called, had lots of exhibits that told stories about how people were surviving COVID and being with their family, we were also working really, really closely with people to look at the Black Lives Matter stories and what else was happening in our city, and bringing that into our heritage spaces. And I think, if there's any key message that I want people to go with today, all of our relationships are reciprocal, and it's about knowing that you can learn as much, and you've got to listen to the communities that you work with. And that's one real takeaway I've got. So that's how Voices started. So we had, for Voices, the original Gloucester Looking Up project, we had our first community panel. And that, again, that infrastructure is an integral part of how we deliver Voices. So Voices had a community grant programme. As we did with Gloucester Looking Up, we make money available, relatively small pots of money available, to local organisations, individuals, communities, artists, filmmakers who have a story to tell about Gloucester. And we have all of those, we get now about 50 applications, of which we can fund between 10 and 20 each round. But the important thing for us is that the decisions about who gets funded aren't made by me, they're made by a community panel. The application process is really, really light touch. It's a supportive process. Because I'm not making the ultimate decision on my own, I'm able to go out and advise, support, have one-to-one sessions. And again, if you're wanting to work with diverse communities, younger people, people that have maybe faced barriers to being involved in the heritage sector, you need to be able to go and have a cup of tea with people, put them at their ease, talk them through the application process, and make sure that first fit over the threshold happens in a supportive way. I would say my super skill is connecting people, and I think it's like we often have the case of a young filmmaker, for example, who's never made a film in their life, and I'll be able to hook them up with somebody who can mentor them. Or a community that would really like to tell their story through Stitch, but they don't know, again, where to get the materials or who to work with. And there are people, we've got a really strong network across Gloucestershire. I will talk a bit more about some of these other points as I go through my presentation. But again, and I think anybody who went to the equity talk at the end of yesterday, you've got to be prepared to be challenged, and you've got to be prepared to listen, and you've got to be prepared to take on challenging subject matter in a supportive way. Mentoring, I can't emphasize that enough, how important that has been, and reciprocal mentoring. We've got to continually be learning from the people that we work with. Last couple of points. Marketing support and bespoke training. When we're talking small grants to people who may never have delivered a creative, cultural or heritage project before. We only have a marketing person one day a week, But that is huge that that person is able to support all these individual organisations, individuals, community groups to get their stories out. And then again, legacy. It's not, we don't just fly in, do a project, fly out. When we start to make a relationship with the people we work with, we hope it's going to be for a long time, and we hope there's different levels of engagement. And I'll talk a bit more about that throughout my presentation. So very quickly, this is a lovely Georgia, one of our earliest mentees. During the Black Lives Matter, when we first started working really closely with the black community in Gloucester, one of the things they said was, we're making this work, but we don't have people that were doing this 10, 20, 30 years ago. We're the first people that had the opportunity to make this work. Excuse me. And we were able to, for the older black community, we brought in an artist who you might be aware of from Birmingham, but who they chose, Mr. Vanley Burke, who has continued to work with our community ever since, which is brilliant. And then Ryder Shafiq, who was one of the artists who was mentored by Vanley, mentored Georgia. Georgia, as a result of that, she applied for funding. She wasn't quite in a position to deliver her project. Ryder mentored her. She then successfully got funding. She was working in a deprived area of Gloucester called the Pictodrome. Her family was so thrilled by this, they built her a gallery space in the Pictodrome. Her family went in there and built her. She's continued to create exhibitions there ever since, and she got further down the line. She did a mentoring project herself, working with young people from Gloucester Academy. So that kind of ladder of mentoring is really integral to what we do. One of the exhibitions she had was, again, this was somebody who applied with a little bit of support from the local homeless organisation. I put this in partly because I think his work is astounding, but this was a man who had until recently been homeless himself. These were the photos he took of his community. Again, with this event we had, I'll talk to people at the end, we had really challenging safeguarding issues around putting this exhibition on, but we did it anyway. And I think, again, it's about, you're going to be challenged, but you need to kind of talk to your community, listen to your community, and find out ways of telling these stories. And Georgia was able, because she was being mentored at the time, helped us curate and stage that exhibition, which was great. This was a wonderful woman called Kelly, who came to us saying, who had not done any kind of further education at all, not been employed at all, but she started collecting the history of her. She's of Romani descent, and she started collecting photographs and stories about her Romani family. And again, we were able to match her up take her over the threshold into different venues in Gloucester. She applied through the community panel like everyone else. We were able to match her up with the folk of Gloucester, and then we talked to her, listened to her. How can we get people to see this exhibition? And the folk agreed with Kelly to host a Romani Day. We had over 200 people come, Romani families from all over the country, and it was the first time they'd gone into a heritage venue. But we had, the exhibition was called Kushti Divis, which means hello and welcome in Romani. We had all these photos with the stories of Kelly's family. We had a Billy Joe, which is a Romani stew that was free that we gave to people, and we had the dancing as well. It was the most amazing day, but those people had never before gone into that space. But now Kelly and the folk and others are continuing to work. She did a second exhibition with voices called Dordy Dordy Dicka Kai, which means, oh dear, look at this, and worked with one of our other key partners, the Gloucestershire Archives, to look at the representation of her family in newspapers over the last couple of 100 years. Some of the photos from her second exhibition, and I put this one in. This was the one on your right. Another artist, Caroline McCarthy, who did a story about the history of boxing in Gloucester, which is a really big thing, in stitch. And she ended up making this phenomenal stitching booth, which is about Ron Taylor's boxing booth. You got families, kids, everyone coming in. We were able to show this alongside Kelly's, And suddenly the folk was filled with people from all generations, interacting in different ways. And again, just coming back to all of these projects came through our community panel. We're talking about relatively small grants that enabled these projects to happen. We try and share, we also take, again, listening to our community, the heritage that's important to people isn't always the heritage of the major sites in the city centre. It's about the stories that happen outside of the city centre. So this is an area of Gloucester, Kingsholm. We had a few different projects that had come forward, so we tried to kind of share them collectively. Again, we kind of look at how we can engage everybody. We had a sticker trail for this. So families went round and got the stickers if they went to all the different sites. And then, yes, it is working. And then we kind of have projects that animate and make sites come to life. Like this one, again, came through the community panel. And this artist brought Hillfield Gardens. It's where old monuments from Gloucester have kind of been dumped with very little interpretation. So she made this app for us so that you can go and find out, make the GIF work and find out about these different spaces. Very briefly, Clapham Court was another project. Clapham Court is the second tallest building in Gloucester. The cathedral's the tallest. No one's allowed to be taller than the cathedral. We worked with, it was being emptied to become down, so we were able to bring some of our Gloucester community. We had 10 artists who worked with the residents who were leaving and told their stories through installations of 10 of the flats. And again, for that, we opened it for 2 weekends in November. We had queues outside, and we had over 1,000 people through 2 weekends in November. And again, you know, in a city that's been described as a cultural cold spot, I don't agree with that, but that's how it's described. The fact that 1,000 people are going to come out on their weekends to look at a community arts heritage project shows that there is a need for it. And if you work with the community, we worked with the residents to tell their stories, they were an integral part of the project, then you will get the audiences. Again, I'm going to start whistling through these because I've got, with 157 projects, I'm not going to try and do all of them. But Trax was a nice project. This was a musician who worked with octogenarians. He went into care homes, he met people in their homes, and he told their story through song and songwriters. So and also rather beautifully, another asylum seeker who we've worked with a lot did the illustrations from that and worked in that project too. This was we try and work with schools and colleges and the university and as many partners as possible. This project came where we worked with the Gloucester, with the Civic Trust and other partners, worked with Gloucester College. We had 93 students. They all got given a history of old residents of Westgate Street in Gloucester, and they made a congregation. So the students did the illustration, and on the back of all of these panels, there's a history of that resident of that street. And then, again, our work with schools. We don't do the schools through the community panel. We have a couple of dedicated grants just for them and work very closely with our key partner, Gloucestershire Archives. Excuse me. I'll just take a sip of this. And we're with our partners and English, Historic England. So we do Heritage Schools training, but we also co-design and co-create projects with teachers and pupils. This has led to, so they come up, again, the pupils come up themselves, the teachers come up with them about what they want to do to celebrate their heritage. They wanted a conference. We do a conference now. We've done it 2 years running. It's now going to go to every other year because it's a lot of work. But we have this great conference where they hear from other Voices projects. They also hear from somebody who's got a national perspective. We send out a newsletter at least every term, sometimes every half term, to all the schools in Gloucestershire. This project that's illustrated was a child's eye view of Gloucester, where little year 6 pupils went out and they decided what was important to them about the history of Gloucester. But really important is the heritage ambassadors. And that is a group of 17 year 10 pupils, changes every year, 17 this year, I think it was 12 last year. And they go into different venues that are in our Heritage Forum, and they look at their education policy, and they look at their outreach, and they get, again, fed usually, but they kind of are able to give that active feedback on what that venue's doing. Lastly, I just want to talk a bit about, right at the beginning I talked about legacy, and I talked about people coming along with us on the journey. And I think it's really, when we first applied for funding, and one of our funders is sitting in the audience, we had something that we called strategic projects. And we thought we'd do the community grants, and we'd run them, and that would all go marvellously. And then we'd work with big partners to deliver projects. And then very quickly into our process, we realized it's not, the strategic projects are actually growth projects. And each one of our bigger projects has grown from one of our small community grants. So Threads, for example, started with a group of 14 women, all of whom wanted to do a panel about what was important to them about Gloucester history, which you see here very beautifully depicts in Blackfriars. As we made that, we got the connections they had with other stitching groups and other community groups across Gloucester. So we decided to showcase that with a number of different events and put it into the cathedral. Again, in listening mode, having had that wonderful event, we talked to them and all the other people that were involved in that first Threads event. And they said, what we really want is for the opportunity to see some world-class art, but actually our women, they don't go into the city centre. They will not go into the city centre. So we brought the red dress, which some of you might have known of, to a Friendship Cafe, which is in an area of Gloucester, again, a relatively deprived area, but there's an incredible sewing studio that works with lots of different people. And we got this wonderful mixture of people from, we're in Gloucestershire, so we had people that were from stitching, women's guild communities outside of Gloucester, and then the local people. And this was what inspired Sunny Bush, the Costume of Gloucester. And the Costume of Gloucester was such an amazing project. We had 132 different contributors made their patch of what was important to them about Gloucester's history and heritage. It's modelled here by the wonderful Tia, who is one of our young people who acted as an ambassador for Voices. It goes out every year in Gloucester Day, which is this kind of parade that happens through Gloucester, and it's now gone into the museum as part of the permanent collection. And alongside this, we were able to show costumes of Gloucester. So this went into the cathedral, and the costumes of Gloucester were the clothes that everyday people wear in Gloucester, and their stories from them. So for example, we had everything from like the ice cream the Walls factory, which is in Gloucester. So we had one of their uniforms. But the first trans policewoman is from Gloucester. And we had, Ukrainian child's dress and all kinds of things that people shared with us with their stories that was shown alongside the Costume of Gloucester. But that's a real legacy piece that comes out, and people are so proud to have been part of that project. A couple more shots of the costume. That's the one that the photographer from the local paper made me do, looking through it. And the next one was this is how some of our local stories, and I think if you get out there and work with your community and with local people in your area, your local stories can have national or even international significance. And this again really demonstrates that how a project develops. So as I mentioned before, when I first started working with some of the black artists and communities in Gloucester, and they said we need a mentor, we need somebody who's been doing this before. And they suggested Vanley. We were able to get Vanley. We've been working with Vanley ever since, Vanley Burke. And the first project they did, History, Her Story, Their Story, Our Story, was really, we had people went into Gloucester Museum in the end. We worked with schools. Local artists responded to Vanley's work, made their own work. It was a really amazing exhibition, and it was really amazing to go into that. We have talks programs, we had an education program, and people were saying, I've been coming to this museum all my life, and this is the first time I've been coming in here with my children. It's the first time I've seen my community represented in this space. And that's, you know, it's so important to people. Oh, it's not. Oh, it is clicking on. We carried on working with that. This is a Windrush project that we did, and that's more from history. But because I mentioned before, Gloucestershire Archives been a key partner. This is really important because it's very important to our communities. They know that the work they produce is then going to be held by archives, so that the voices in archives in 100 years' time will represent everybody in Gloucester and not just the great and the good as they may have done before. But also the archives is a resource. First and foremost, we are a heritage organisation. And part of our training that we give all community producers is access to the archives, access to those older stories. And through working with Ryder and Vanley, one of the most incredible things that Gloucestershire Archives holds is the slave song, which is now a UNESCO World Heritage item, but it's the earliest notated voice of enslaved people from the 18th century, which was notated in Barbados, mid-18th century, and somehow made its way to Gloucestershire via the archives of Granville Sharp, the abolitionist. And Vanley and Ryder, obviously Ryder's from, his family are of Bayesian descent. Vanley grew up initially in the Caribbean. So working with this piece of music was just incredible and getting access to that. So because we'd been working together by this stage for 3 or 4 years, we were able to start exploring this really poignant, really powerful piece of work and start exploring it with the community. So this photo is actually a preliminary exhibition we did. So Vanley and Ryder made a response to the slave song, which is about the ongoing trauma inherited from enslavement. But they worked with, back in George's gallery, back in the Picture Drome, they took some of the ideas they were working with at an early stage and worked with the community. So this thing suddenly didn't just appear in Gloucester Cathedral, but we'd work with the community along the way. And then it led to this incredible installation that went into Gloucester Cathedral in September. It's the stitching that's on Vanley's piece there on the right-hand side was done by another local group that we worked with and helped establish through Voices funding called Soul Jamaica. Soul Jamaica is a group of about 15 strong Caribbean women who do stitching projects, and they chose, this is from the Slaves Code, which originated in Barbados, and they chose what bits of that were important to include in the installation. Again, we had this fantastic amount of people through. We're now speaking to the national trusts and other cathedrals about this going on tour next year and beyond, potentially going back to Barbados. Just again, as an aside, the way we work, while we showed this, we also worked with some artists from Barbados who came over and showed some work that they were making as part of the exhibition, and we're supporting in a lot of contact with artists from Barbados, who, if it goes back there, they'll be curating and deciding how that's seen, and also showing their work alongside. So Rise, who's one of the artists from Lucca, I haven't got an image here today, is actually coming to Stroud in June, which is fantastic. Sorry, just going, I can't go back. But I want to turn to a kind of more cheerful note. Well, not more cheerful note, but the whole point of Voices is what now, because we've been going 3 years, we became a charity last year. We've got funding for a bit longer, so we're still around. But one of the things that has emerged out of all of this is we've built this fantastic community. And we've built this fantastic community that is very representative of everybody in Gloucester. And what happens when we have events and we have celebratory events is we now have people from all walks of life who'll come and join them. So we have I've gone back to that one. So we had a film night, for example, recently, where we showed a lot of films, Dorothy Dick Kai, we had a film about the Chinese community, we had a film about young people, but the one that was the standout film of the night and got a standing ovation was a first-time film made by somebody who was talking about the skater community in Gloucester, and he'd made the skater community in Gloucester is phenomenal. They've built their own spaces, they've campaigned. It's a really, but that suddenly, and for that community who were there at the event, suddenly getting people of all ages, of all backgrounds going, this is brilliant, this is fascinating, you know, and seeing that history celebrated. And we do, again, one of our favourite events, we showcase a number of different projects together so people know about their projects. We run them with a fantastic local organisation called We Cook Speak Eat, who provide, they run sessions for refugees to come and cook and eat together and learn English as a second language as a kind of byproduct of that. But they also do these movable feasts for voices. So we're able to show work that relates to that community and have that food and have that big celebratory event. And I think that kind of having that, you know, ensuring that those conversations keep having and having that celebration of people and of our community is what has made Voices a success and why we have a community that keeps coming back. So I've probably rattled through that. I don't know if I've gone under or over time. I'm all right. I am here for any questions. I think you asked questions from the floor. Is that right? I need to find my headphone.
Can we just say thank you for Jackie? That was absolutely brilliant. Well done. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And as Jackie said, she's open to questions. Would anybody like, while you've got the opportunity to ask Jackie, just raise your hand.
I'll just put this in.
I can hear myself.
Hello.
Hang on. Thank you very much.
Where are you? All right. Hiya.
Thank you very much for the very insightful and inspiring talk.
Thank you.
Obviously, you got the funding, and that's really great for like facilitating, catalysing these sorts of things. But what I'm curious about is, what would you say was most important about getting the buy-in, the social capital, the momentum in the early days, especially?
What do I think is most important about the buy-in of the early days?
Hang on.
Sorry,
say again.
You said what was most important about the early days?
In terms of building your buy-in and your momentum amongst the communities you're working with?
Well, first of all, it's listening and reciprocal mentoring. And I think that, I think that it was really important that we had a strong network with the Heritage Forum, but I think it was going into community, there was a lot of having cups of tea with people, going to events, being present and talking to people and making ourselves and the organisation available and listening and valuing what you heard and taking, like somebody said it yesterday about another project, you have to take the criticism. A lot of the people that we're working with have not felt welcomed in heritage sites. They really haven't. So ensuring that we get the welcome right, and we don't always get it right, but that was a starting point.
Okay, anybody else got their hand up? One over the back there.
Hi, thank you very much. I wanted to ask about how you measure the depth, like how people connected with the programs beyond statistics and things like that.
So, I think we did have an independent evaluator for our last 3 years, and we used a range of different ways of collecting evidence. We have comments books, we have a membership, we have ways of people feeding back. We do a lot of, we're very hands-on. We don't just give out grants and let people go. We do planning sessions, we do training and mentoring with them, we do like a session after each project. I think it's still, our evaluation process is still something that we're looking at. We're still, we're trying to work with partners like, I had the social justice students from the local university meeting with me last week, and they've been doing a deep dive into some of our postcode data, for example, and that shows that in terms of, as expected, in terms of audiences, we're getting people, it's a different audience strata than most heritage sites are getting because of the work that we do. But I still think, and it is part of our next tranche, is to kind of keep deepening that evaluation, and also, as is Voice's way, having our community producers, having the people we work with to play a more active role, and the community panels play a more active role in the evaluation. For us, although it was a kind of it was a useful thing to do, that model of having an external evaluator doesn't always work because they're not connected to the work and they're not connected to the communities that are delivering it. So having a more flexible, dynamic approach is something that we're looking at this time round.
Okay, and we've the person in the red top at the front here. Thank you, Elle.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask, you mentioned Gloucester Museum and the costume being acquired into the collection. I just wondered what your relationship with the museum is. Do you have like a formal type of...
We're in the process of drawing up. So we're in the process of drawing up partnership agreements with people like the museum. We've got one with the archives because we've been working solidly with them from the outset. And the museum now, they want to make it part of their policy because they've got no contemporary collection policy at the moment because they've got no money, like a lot of regional museums. But they now want to make it their policy. Every year they're going to take something, probably from one of our growth projects. But every year one of the things that we produce or our community producers produce will go into their permanent collection. So we're just establishing that. But it's, you know, again, it's a regional museum, very overworked, under-resourced, but we have an amazing informal relationship. We are in the process of making it more formal.
Okay, anybody else? Raise your hand. There's someone at the front here.
Thank you so much. And thank you also for inspiring us all to come and visit in Gloucester. So my question is something you mentioned very briefly, and that was some of the safeguarding challenges you had. I was wondering if you could speak a bit more about that and how you overcome them. Maybe you had some creative solutions to that.
Creative solution. I do. I probably won't go into too much. I'd quite like to talk to you about that afterwards. All I'll say to kind of everybody here is having a safeguarding policy and safeguarding training for principal staff is really important. But we also we deliver something called a Training and Inspiration Day for people that have just got a grant and people who are thinking of having a grant. We touch on safeguarding as part of that. We have a kind of safeguard, like a mini policy. It's not a policy, a full policy, but as well as our policy, we have something that we give people to take away from that, and we make it really clear what the safeguarding line is. And it astounds me. I come from working a lot in sort of youth engagement and stuff like that. It astounds me how many heritage organisations don't have safeguarding policy, don't think about that. And I think it is something that increasingly we all have to take on board. And if you're doing this kind of work, you are working with vulnerable adults, you are going to be working with children, things are going to come up. But do come and talk to me afterwards and I'll talk a little bit more about that.
Okay, thank you, Jackie.